My bottom's wet!
Thomas Thierst videos are brought to you by my Patreons and viewers like you. Thank you. Series 21 of Thomas & Friends had so many weird changes to it, but I'm not just talking about the bouncing, I mean new characters, or returning old characters like Bulgy or Terrence, or fixing and rebooting characters like Rosie, or even bringing back forgotten characters like Big Mickey from Tugs.
What?
In many regards, this really was the last hurrah for the Brenner era, but because this season had so many changes in it, that got me thinking, what is the correct order in which all of this takes place? Now, I thought just watching the episodes in order as they aired would be the correct way to watch them, but apparently not. I think the biggest thing that screwed over Series 21 was that 8 of its episodes were cut from it. Now, if you want to know more about those cut episodes, I've already done an extensive video on it. But what makes Series 21 slightly unique is that there is a lot of overlapping plot lines in it, like Diesel's arc in a season spanning over multiple episodes, or Carly's gantry track being added to docks. So for this video, I'm going to be grouping each connected episode element into its own segment, like a Carly segment for all of her episodes, and a Diesel segment for all of his episodes. And at the very end of the video, I'll bring all of the segments together into one big timeline, in an easy and digestible way for you all to understand. This timeline will be based purely on events that happen within each episode, so I'll be taking into account when a change happens, like when Rosie becomes red, or when Big Mickey gets his face. Hell, I'll even be taking into account the weather of each episode. So all the winter episodes will have to take place together, and all of the autumn episodes will also have to take place together. I'm also going to take into account the Rebecca episodes too, and other cut Series 21 concepts. Now, any generic episodes that I can't place in the timeline, such as Philip's Number or Runaway Engine, will follow the airing order, while episodes like The Unfriendly Elephant won't be included since I have nothing to go off on. And speculated episodes like Diesel Do Right or Rosie is Red also won't be featured. And I'm just leaving Journey Beyond Soda out of this altogether. This is all just a bit of fun, and I don't really think all of what I say here today was intended by any of the writers. It's just a bit of fun trying to map out the timeline. So, with all that out of the way, let's get into it. Diesel's timeline. So Diesel has a very interesting journey in this season. He starts off being a big bully when he bumps into Daisy and injures her. Though after doing this, Diesel starts to feel bad, and he actually has a pretty profound realization about himself.
I don't suppose you'll ever want to be my friend.
And weirdly enough, each Diesel appearance after this episode actually has him dealing with that conflict, learning to respect Harvey and Daisy.
You're both so different!
Saying he hates Christmas,
What's so special about that?
only to like it in the next scene.
That sounds...
Wonderful.
And rudely bumping into Thomas, as he does, but still managing to get him to Cole near the end of the episode.
Diesel, you are a hero!
I really like how they played around with Diesel's character in this season. But there is something I find slightly confusing about it. For example, Diesel seems pretty remorseful about hurting Daisy in Springtime for Diesel.
I'm sorry for shunting into you the way I did, Daisy. I really didn't mean to cause you any trouble.
But then in the very next episode, he goes back to being annoyed about her and spreading rumors about her and Harvey.
I can be useful too.
That's not what Daisy thinks!
What? Why? This has led many fans to speculate that these episodes may have been swapped around in production. A most singular engine being the first episode in production makes way more sense for a few reasons. For example, it establishes Diesel is working at the Harwick branch line.
As I'm shunting trucks between Harwick and Knapford, the line will be much improved.
It sets up Diesel's hatred of Daisy, which causes him to land in the water. All of which seems like the perfect setup for Springtime for Diesel. When Diesel bumps into Daisy, but then he has his huge character reflection. Doesn't watching the episode like that make way more sense? This is just speculation, but I think the producers may have swapped around the episodes. Probably because Springtime for Diesel was just a better episode than A Most Singular Engine, and perhaps the producers just wanted a stronger episode to start the season off with. Even on the Danger at the Docks DVD, the two episodes are listed the other way round, with A Most Singular Engine being the first one, and Springtime for Diesel being the second. I wonder why. But what's interesting about Springtime for Diesel is that it also has continuity with another Series 21 episode. So, in the case of the puzzling parts, Sydney wonders who the new parts are for.
But I can't remember what I'm supposed to do with it.
And so he and Paxton go around looking for clues, only to find out that the parts were for Sydney the whole time.
Mystery solved! Ha-ha! Yes!
And this episode was originally written for Series 21, which is why this line exists.
Ever since Diesel bumped into me this morning and jangled my parts, I've been even more forgetful than usual.
In Springtime for Diesel, he bumps into Paxton and he bumps into Sydney. Then in this episode, also written by Davey Moore, we have a story about Paxton and Sydney after Diesel bumps into him.
Have a good day, everyone!
There's also a bit of continuity with Daisy's Perfect Christmas, where we see Diesel, Den and Dart hanging out with Daisy at the Diesel Works. And since it was established in her episode that Daisy hadn't met Den and Dart,
Look, Dart, a diesel rail car.
this means that the winter episodes definitely take place after these Diesel episodes. And since that episode ended with it snowing, and the Big Freeze came after that, then that would make the Big Freeze Diesel's last appearance in Series 21, which honestly, I think is kind of perfect, since that episode starts with Diesel bumping Thomas, like he's done before, and when Diesel doesn't help Thomas here, we assume as the audience that it's just regular old Diesel being a bully.
I can't be stopping to help you, Thomas.
But Diesel actually surprises us later in the episode by doing a good deed for Thomas and bringing the coal for the engines.
Ugh, that's just rotten. Ugh.
Honestly, his arc kind of worked out perfectly, weirdly enough. He starts out working at the Harwick branch line, but gets cross with Daisy and Harvey, only to fall in the sea.
My bottom's wet!
Then he bumps into Paxton and Sydney, sending them on a wild goose chase, and he bumps into Daisy, sending her to the Diesel Works, only for Diesel to regret what he did and spill his guts to Daisy.
I really didn't mean to cause you any trouble.
Daisy says that he can only have friends if he wants to change.
If you want to make friends, Diesel, you need to change your ways.
So Diesel actually does try to change.
I've changed my ways.
And hey, later that Christmas, Diesel actually hangs out with Den, Dart and Daisy as his friends. And even though he does bump into Thomas for a laugh, he still does bring him the coal and gets the respect of Annie and Clarabelle. It's honestly written perfectly. Even the part with Annie and Clarabelle respecting Diesel kind of ties back into a throwaway gag at the end of the Railcar and Coaches, where Diesel pulls Annie and Clarabelle as a gag at the end of the episode. I honestly really love how they wrote our favorite Diesel frenemy in this season. Carly's timeline. Another major bit of continuity in Series 21 is Carly the new Crane. When the others start to joke about Cranky getting old, he gets worried that he's going to be replaced.
I'm not that old. I just need a spot of oil.
But when a new Crane comes to the docks, it turns out that she's just there to help Cranky.
Hey up, Chuck.
I hear you've been struggling.
Him and Cranky start to fight over unloading ships, but eventually come together as friends. And even Big Mickey shows up out of nowhere for a surprise cameo.
What?
Now what's interesting is that this gantry track that Carly uses in the episode was actually seen many times before Carly was added to the docks. It was seen in Dowger Hat's Busy Day when Thomas collects the hat. It was seen in Stuck in Gear when Harvey's at the docks. Hell, it was even seen in the winter episodes. So the winter episodes must take place before the Carly episodes. I mean, she's not there in the Big Freeze and she's not there in Emily in the Middle, so Carly must be at the docks after Christmas, right? But weirdly, Carly does appear in a shed for Edward, which means that a shed for Edward has to take place after the Carly episodes, but the Carly episodes have to take place after the winter episodes. So where are we in the timeline again? It's pretty safe to assume that the Carly episodes take place sometime post all of the Christmas stuff, but before the Fastest Red Engine on Sodor and a shed for Edward. So maybe this takes place in February? March? Carly's placement actually really helped with constructing this timeline, surprisingly, because the gantry track was clearly added to the set without Carly there, and remains there through autumn and all of winter. We also have this scene with Topham going down to the docks for an important meeting.
The Fat Controller came down to Brendan for an important meeting with the dock manager.
I'm guessing the meeting was about Carly, since she shows up later in the episode. Such a neat little detail. A real twin engines moment right there, with Topham purchasing the twins off screen. Eventually, Edward and Thomas are sent to collect Carly, and, how did Carly fit in these trucks exactly? What, was she on the flatbed or something? I mean, they would have had to put her on the track and... Oh no. Oh no. So anyway, Carly is added to the docks and Cranky becomes annoyed with her in the next episode because she keeps helping other engines like Emily. But when they both get tangled up, Cranky and Carly learn to work together. And even Big Mickey joins in. Everything seems to make perfect sense, right? Wrong. Because in Thomas's animal arc, we see Carly at the docks in winter.
It's
It's the weather, Chuck. It's causing havoc everywhere.
So one of the cut Series 21 episodes was Thomas's Animal Arc. This episode was written by Lee Pressman, who wrote the Carly episodes, and he also wrote Animal Arc, which was cut from the season, where it's Christmas Eve and we see Thomas helping out the animals during Christmas.
The boiler in the animals' winter house has broken down.
Oh dear.
However, when Thomas goes to the docks, Carly is seen talking to Emily. So was this scene meant to be in the original script? There was obvious changes to these episodes when it came to retooling them for Series 22 episodes. But what's interesting about Carly here is that she talks to Emily, which seems like a callback to when they first spoke in New Crane on the docks. Who knows if this scene was just added in after the fact, but it is something to consider. Maybe the writers wanted Carly to arrive before the winter episodes? Who knows? Speaking of winter episodes, the winter episode timeline. Now, for some reason, and I don't know why, but Series 21 has so many winter episodes in it. More than any other Thomas season, I think. There's Terrence Breaks the Ice, Confused Coaches, Emily in the Middle, Daisy's Perfect Christmas, and The Big Freeze. There's also Thomas's Animal Arc, which was cut from the season. And hell, even the Glynn episodes too. Now, while the Glynn episodes weren't going to be in Series 21, they were added to DVDs and streaming. So right there, that is a lot of winter episodes to have in a season. Now, Daisy's Perfect Christmas is the only winter episode to not have any snow in it. So much so that they literally have to make fake snow in the episode.
Fake snow?
Yes! Do you like it?
No, I do not.
And it only snows at the end of the episode. Considering they put up the Christmas decorations, I'm assuming that this is December that we're in. There's also the continuity with Daisy becoming friends with Den, Dart, and Diesel. So the winter episodes take place after springtime, as we've discussed before. So at first, I thought Emily in the Middle would come next, and my reasoning for that was that none of the engines wore their snowplows in the episode, so I assumed it was just the first snow. But there's also no Christmas lights up at Vicarstown, creating a continuity issue with Daisy's Perfect Christmas. So perhaps this episode actually takes place after Christmas, like in January or something, perhaps after all the snow started melting from the big freeze, which would explain the lack of snowplows on the engines, and also the lack of Christmas lights in Vicarstown. In Terrence Breaks the Ice, we see Thomas and Terrence get the final Christmas trees for the season, and they even put one up at Ulstead Castle.
It's very beautiful. Thank you, Terence. Thank you, Thomas.
Christmas trees are traditionally put up around the 8th of December to the 15th of December, so if we're going by that logic, then canonically after Daisy's Perfect Christmas, Terrence Breaks the Ice would be the next episode. If Daisy's Perfect Christmas has the first snow, and then putting up Christmas decorations, then Terrence Breaks the Ice taking place next would make perfect sense, since that episode has snow and they put up the last few Christmas trees. Confused Coaches is super easy to place once you consider that it takes place on New Year's Day. So right away we have a definitive placement of that episode, and according to the narrator in The Big Freeze, that episode takes place a few days after Christmas.
It was just after Christmas, and everyone was enjoying the snow.
Considering this episode shows the animals coming out of hibernation from winter, I think we can easily say that this episode takes place in early January, just as everyone is getting out of the Christmas spirit. So that would place this episode after Confused Coaches, but before Emily in the Middle. Something else I realized about the winter episodes of the season is that none of them actually take place on Christmas. Yeah, weird, right? But weirdly enough, all of the episodes either take place just before Christmas or just after Christmas. It's never on Christmas Day specifically. That's why I really do believe that Thomas's Animal Arc was a cut episode from the season, because this episode actually does take place on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. But because the episode was cut in production and retooled into a Series 22 episode, we technically lost the Christmas episode from Series 21. How funny is that? So let me quickly run back through the timeline again. So it starts off in early December, where Daisy is cross about her Christmas traditions being changed, but eventually accepts her new friends and that things can change. The winter decorations are put up, and we even see the first snow. Cut straight to Terrence Breaks the Ice, where we see Thomas and Terrence getting the last few trees, on what I can assume is December 8th. And despite Terrence nearly drowning, and making a Titanic reference,
I'm sorry, tree. I'm sorry.
the lighting of the trees go off without a hitch. Later around Christmas Eve, the boiler, keeping the animals warm, breaks, and zookeeper Kerry Shale doesn't know what to do.
The boiler in the animals' winter house has broken down.
Get me firefighter Sam!
So Thomas does a good deed for the animals and lets them stay in Tidmouth sheds overnight. And no, I really don't want to know what the shed smelled like. Now, Animal Arc isn't technically canon to Series 21, since it was just retooled to not be in that season. But I thought it would be good to just add it anyways, since parts aspects of these episodes were intended to be in that season. Now, there is that bit of weird Carly continuity, as I said before, but since none of the other winter episodes have Carly in them, and this scene could have easily been a reworked scene that happened later, I'm gonna write this Carly scene off as non-canon. A few days after Christmas, Spencer arrives with the Duke and Duchess. Spencer and Gordon have a little falling out over who's more important, but in the New Year's spirit, Gordon and Spencer forgive each other and enjoy the celebrations as friends again. And it's so sweet to see. A reference to Philip's number is also made in the episode.
I'm number 68.
68.
So Philip's number must take place before all the winter episodes, so that's something to keep in mind too. A few days later after the celebrations, a big freeze comes to the island, in another elaborate reference to tugs.
What?
Where there is a coal shortage, and Thomas ends up getting frozen solid overnight. Diesel is also being his usual self, and Thomas thinks he isn't helping him out. But it turns out he actually was getting the coal, and he finally does a good deed. Carly also isn't at the docks, and she isn't at the docks there later in January when Donald and Douglas and Emily have to collect a train of pipes for Vicarstown. Since the big freeze has everything melting after Christmas, one could argue that the lack of snowplows on engines and the lack of Christmas lights at Vicarstown means we're in January. And with that, that's all of the winter episodes covered. On to autumn.
No, I've done it.
Since we're putting the winter episodes in order, I guess canonically the autumn ones come first. So before Daisy's Perfect Christmas, I'm guessing Stuck in Gear and Unscheduled Stops would have to take place before winter. So in Stuck in Gear, apparently a storm comes to the island, which is how Harvey gets stuck and needs help. We get a few scenes at the docks where Carly is nowhere to be seen, which is great since it's consistent with the other winter episodes. So these ones can easily go beforehand. Later in Unscheduled Stops, when Bertie breaks down, Thomas has to make extra unscheduled stops, but he gets into trouble with the Fat Controller.
I know all about your unscheduled stops, Thomas.
And Bulgy comes to help out.
Bulgy?
And finally, we have Oliver's Fear of Fireworks. Now, Oliver's Fear of Fireworks was one of the cut episodes from Series 22, and later retooled into Samson and the Fireworks. I've no idea if Samson and the Fireworks was going to be in 21, or if the change happened really early in production, but regardless, this episode does take place seemingly on Fireworks Night, or Bonfire Night. So I'm going to assume that Samson and the Fireworks takes place before the winter episodes, and before Daisy's episodes. Now, onto the timeline that everyone's been waiting for. The Shedward timeline. Two of the most iconic episodes from Series 21 are The Fastest Red Engine on Sodor and A Shed for Edward. When most people think of this season, these are the episodes that usually come to mind. I know they are for me anyway. What's more interesting though is that this wasn't the original plan. After Edward moves out from Wellsworth, that was when Rebecca was meant to come in and take his spot in the STEAM team. And this bit of foreshadowing at the end of A Shed for Edward was intended for Rebecca.
I wonder who will be joining us here at Tidmouth Sheds.
Not Big World Big Adventures. I kinda love that they did this three-parter episode arc. You can just tell how coordinated all the writers were when they wrote this season. With the first part about Rosie being written by Helen Farrell, the second part about Edward being written by Lee Pressman, and the third part about Rebecca being written by Davey Moore. Each writer from the season got their own part to write in this multi-episode arc, and I just think that's so cool. Here's a hot take. I don't think fans would have hated A Shed for Edward as much had the episodes just come out as intended. Like, had we just gotten that second part with Rebecca arriving, I think these episodes would have overall went better with fans. Because the Rebecca episode is actually quite good, surprisingly. Considering that episode has Flying Scotsman.
Excuse me!
Or even a reference to The Fastest Red Engine on Sodor.
And I'm the fastest red engine. Hey!
Excuse me, Jane. Did you?
It just ties in so perfectly to the season, and it's such a shame they didn't do it. So now onto the episodes themselves. The Fastest Red Engine on Sodor follows James as he gets jealous of Rosie being repainted red.
You really are red.
Yes, I've been repainted.
So much so that he starts to race. Edward tries to warn James, but he doesn't listen and crashes into Tidmouth Sheds. With the sheds in pieces, Thomas goes to stay at Knapford while Edward stays with Philip at Wellsworth. Edward stays there for a few weeks until the sheds are repaired again, but since Wellsworth's shed is closer to his branch line, Edward goes off to mentor Philip, leaving the engines to wonder who will come next. A few days later, Rebecca arrives and she's welcomed to the STEAM team family.
Come on, Rebecca. I'll show you the way to Tidmouth Sheds.
At first, Rebecca feels she can't live up to the others' expectations, but after helping Gordon with his brother,
You look the same size to me. If anything, I think Gordon looks bigger.
the two grow a mutual respect for each other and go off into the sunset. Man. What a cool multi-3-part arc that the writers gave us. They knew these changes were a big deal, so I have major respect for how much time they put into this arc, making everything work and tie in. It's really clever how they did some of this stuff. Since Edward permanently leaves the shed here, and Rebecca was meant to come in the next episode, I think it's safe to say that the winter episodes must take place before the Rebecca episode. Also, Carly is seen at the docks, so that means the Carly episodes must take place in between the winter episodes in the shed for Edward. Another question that fans have raised is why doesn't Philip sleep at Wellsworth Shed, even though in series 19 it's established that he works as a shunter at Knapford. But there might be an in-universe reason for this change, I think. So Soder Island fansite may have given us the answer. In their review for A Shed for Edward, Ryan Hagan suggested the idea of Philip taking goods trains to Ellsworth. This seems like an oddly specific thing to say about A Shed for Edward review. The only reason I bring this up is because Ryan Hagan also hinted about Rebecca coming to Tidmouth Sheds, which, hey, is exactly what happened. So is this thing about Philip taking goods trains to Wellsworth also possibly true? And actually, now that I think about it, Philip's number actually has a random scene where Philip is seen taking a goods train to Wellsworth, only for him to go back to Knapford in the next scene. Not only that, but Philip's number was also written by Lee Pressman, and he wrote A Shed for Edward too. So maybe, much like what Ryan Hagan said about Rebecca, perhaps there's also some truth to Philip taking goods trains to Wellsworth, which would mean that Philip's number would probably have to take place before A Shed for Edward. Yeah, the more I think about it, I'm pretty sure that had we just gotten series 21 as written, it could have easily been one of the peakest Brenner seasons ever. Like, remind me again why fans don't like these episodes? Like what? Because Edward got written out? I understand that, but like Edward kind of makes a million times more sense at Wellsworth. Even the design of the shed that they put Edward in is based on a shed from the books. It's actually more Railway series accurate. It's the same shed, guys. This change gave more of a chance for Edward to shine as a character. You can really tell in this season that they understood how to use Edward. Like, despite this being his last season as a main, they still totally understood how to write him. No longer would we get these weird scenes of him being a pussy at the shed. Now we actually get to see Edward at the docks, or helping out with Wellsworth Shed, or just doing general Edward things. Weirdly enough, this even works with Philip's older episodes.
Where are you off to?
Where Edward tells him off for bragging.
But right now, Philip, you're the one who's showing off.
Oh.
Only for Gordon to say he should get a new shed.
We really must find that little Diesel another shed to sleep in.
And since Philip is a parallel to Thomas in The Adventure Begins,
That little box cap can be very cheeky sometimes.
Yes, reminds me of a little tank engine who wanted to see the world.
them having Edward and Philip go off into the sunset is honestly a really clever idea. In terms of where their characters were in the CGI seasons, this just made more sense. I should also mention that the episode Chucklesome Trucks was also going to be in Series 21. You can just tell that episode was so obviously written for this season because of all the references like The Adventure Begins, Percy Takes the Plunge, and Dirty Objects. Where the first episode was about Rebecca dealing with the coaches, the second one was going to be about her dealing with the trucks. So Chucklesome Trucks will probably take place after Confusion Net Delay. And so now that I've covered all of the timelines, let's put all of them together in one big list. Ladies and gentlemen, after literally 7 years of me thinking about it, here is the timeline for Series 21. The timeline begins with a most singular engine. We see Diesel arrive at the Harwick branch line, where it's established that he'll be working on Daisy's line with her. But when Daisy starts to get on Diesel's nerves, he starts taking his aggression out on the trucks, and starts to spread rumours about Harvey and Daisy. But it turns out they actually have a lot more in common, leaving Diesel cross. And the episode ends with Diesel sliding into the sea and having to be rescued by Harvey. It should also be noted that we see a lot of spring flowers on the sets. These flowers aren't typically there in the summer versions of the sets, so we can assume that they probably added it because it's springtime. Speaking of which, the next episode is called Springtime for Diesel, so we can assume that we're in spring. Diesel decides to bump into Paxton and Sydney that morning, which leads them on a hunt to go find out where these missing parts came from. Diesel also bumps into Daisy that morning, which sends her off to the Diesel Works. Hey look, there are those spring flowers again that aren't normally there. That's cool. Paxton and Sydney go off looking for clues, but eventually realize that the parts are for Sydney the whole time. Later that evening, Diesel visits Daisy at the Diesel Works, where we get to see Diesel actually open up and be honest to someone for the first time ever. Daisy let her tell Daisy later tells Diesel to change his ways, and the episode ends on an optimistic note that maybe Diesel can. Around the end of spring, Topham gets sick, and Dowager Hat looks after the railway. We also get our first look at Brendam Docks with its new gantry track, though you can just barely make it out in the shot. I do really like how this gantry track was added to the set months before Carly arrives. It really helps add some realism. Though with Dowager Hat looking after the railway, it soon turns into chaos, but with some help from Emily, they soon get the railway working again, and Topham returns to the line. During the summer, more and more tourists start coming to Ulfstead Castle, but when Millie has to do all the dirty work, Stephen and Millie start to fall out. But eventually Glyn, Millie and Stephen figure out a way to work at the castle. Also during the summer, Topham gets a new PA system. This goes about as well as you'd expect, with all the summer holiday passengers going down to the quarry and all the quarry workers going down to the beach. But eventually Edward saves the day, showing that just because they're old doesn't mean they can't be really useful. Later, Henrietta goes off to the works, while Toby is given a new coach called Hannah to work with. It doesn't go too well, and Hannah eventually needs to go to the works herself. It should also be noted that we see Red Rosie for the first time. Now, I wasn't sure if this episode was connected to the James episode, but considering that James is off doing wacky stuff, I don't think these episodes probably take place in the same day. So I'm guessing this is the first time we see Red Rosie. Near the end of the summer, Philip starts to take on more and more trains near Wellsworth Station. He still works around Knapford, but he has been seen working near Edward's branch line too. Philip questions why he has the number 68, but when he rescues 68 sheep from being hurt, he prefers that as the reason. I really like how this episode builds on Gordon and Philip's character. They've come a long way from where they were.
Sorry I teased you before about your number, Philip.
And no, Carly is still not at the docks yet. At the start of the autumn season, a huge storm comes to the island, and all the engines are affected. Harvey ends up getting his gear stuck, but eventually has to get some help to fix it. It should also be noted that Carly is still not at the docks at this point, and Edward is still in the shed. Also in autumn, Bertie the bus breaks down, so Thomas has to start making unscheduled stops. But when Bulgy returns to help out Thomas is soon able to get back to regular service on the branch line. Near the end of autumn, on November 5th we'll say, is Bonfire Night, where Samson and Bradford bring over fireworks to Sodor. But when CGI returnee Cyril the Fogman puts down detonators, Samson confuses them for fireworks and gets lost on his way. But when the fireworks light the way up to the castle, Samson later finds an appreciation for the fireworks. It's officially December now, and Christmas season, as Daisy's getting excited for it, where she meets her new friends, Den, Dart, and Diesel. At first Diesel is grumpy about Christmas, but he soon warms to it very quickly, showing that he can still be a softie. But when they put the decorations up too early, and it doesn't snow, Daisy starts to become upset with Christmas. But after having a chat with Ryan, Judy, and Jerome, Daisy actually accepts that traditions can change over time, just as the first snow of December happens. The island is now covered in snow in the heart of December, as Thomas and Terence get the last few trees for Christmas. But when Terence takes a shortcut across some ice, Thomas has to go rescue him. That night at Ulfstead Castle, the two friends smile as they put up their tiny baby Christmas tree, since Terence lost the big one in the lake. Later in December, on Christmas Eve, when the boiler in the animal park breaks, Thomas lets the animals sleep in Tidmouth sheds for Christmas, in an elaborate parody of Noah's Ark. Again, I should remind you that this episode isn't canon to 21 anymore, hence why Nia and Rebecca are in the shed for example, but parts of the episode were intended for the season, so I'll still list it here anyway. A few days after Christmas and New Year's Eve, when Spencer comes to the island with the Duke and Duchess, Gordon and Spencer start to squabble and cause confusion and delay. And it should be noted that Philip calls back to the episode Philip's number here.
Or the number 68!
That episode wasn't even written by Helen Farrell, so good callback on her part. Eventually Gordon and Spencer get things mixed up, so they have to put things right, just in time for the New Year's celebrations. In the new year, a big blizzard comes to the island of Sodor. Since Edward is in the shed for this episode, and since Carly's nowhere to be seen, we know that these episodes must come later. Diesel bumps into Thomas for a laugh, but when the railway runs out of coal, Thomas thinks that Diesel isn't going to help him out, just to spy him. But it turns out that Diesel was actually just going to get the coal for the stinky steamies. And Diesel actually did do something nice for once. Even the way Annie and Clarabelle admire Diesel here shows how much development they've had since Series 20. Eventually the snow starts to melt and the animals come out of hibernation, and Diesel remains being nice, at least for a little while, as the narrator says. With the snow melting, the engines no longer need snowplows on them. During this time, Emily, Donald, and Douglas take a goods train all the way to Vickerstown. Since it's January, all of the Christmas lights have since been taken down, hence why there's no lights at Vickerstown. After all the snow is melted, Cranky starts to creak more and starts to get anxious that he might be be replaced by a new crane. We even see Topham going to the docks for a meeting, presumably about Carly, who's coming in a few days. But it turns out that Carly was just there to help Cranky and not replace him. However, Carly and Cranky start to fight over unloading ships, but with some wise words from Salty, the two eventually put aside their differences and become friends. Even Big Mickey shows up and the three cranes become the three musketeers. Later, when James sees Rosie has been painted red, he races her on the main line, but nearly crashes into Henry. It's clear that there's a problem with James's brakes, but instead of fixing them, he ignores the problem, only for him to go flying along the main line at 100 miles an hour and crashing right into Tidmouth Sheds. Because of this, Edward has to go off to Wellsworth Sheds with Philip. We also see Carly the crane in this episode too, so we know that this takes place after those episodes. By the end of the episode, Edward decides to go and leave Tidmouth Sheds and mentor Philip, leaving all the others to wonder who will take Edward's spot. The next episode follows a new character called Rebecca. She's a big tender engine who came from the mainland to help out Gordon with express trains. Rebecca moves into the shed with the others. There's also this scene with Diesel and Rebecca at the docks, which I think is really cool, and I think it really builds well into Diesel's character. He's really well written in this scene, honestly. Though Rebecca had some teething troubles at first, when she stands up to Gordon's brother, the Flying Scotsman, something Gordon could never do, Gordon finally finds some respect for Rebecca, and the two go off into the sunset. Sometime later, Topham asks for one of the engines to take a goods train across the island to Vicarstown, and Rebecca agrees. James, Thomas and Percy aren't sure and tell Rebecca about their experiences, but Rebecca thinks positively and prevails, showing that if you keep a positive attitude, you can really do anything. If you're curious about some of the lost episodes from the season, feel free to check out this video I've made, and I'll see you all next time. Slán Abhaile!